what influence is just building trust. So we've got Alexis Girvan here, and she has been a consultant for a few years now, and since 2016, pre-pandemic consultant, and she's been going through this. She's been living this out. We've been able to be in conversation and relationship over the last couple of years. Eddie and Alexis go back a little further, but man, just even getting to know you, Alexis, you live this out so well. You live this tool. You are very interesting, but sometimes we don't get to hear all of that because you are so interested. So I'm really excited for you to bring the tool for us. Go ahead and kick us off. And tell us a little bit about yourself. What does being a consultant for you look like in life right now?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Yeah, it's funny because we've had more conversations in the last 2 weeks than we've ever had, you and I, Linker. And so I've gotten to see really the art of conversation sort of play out between the two of us in terms of both of us wanting to find out more about the other person, but also knowing this art and the play between being interested and interesting. So I'm excited to dive into this tool, but I've loved our conversations. And Eddie, you know that our conversations are some of the best gifts to me. So we're really glad to be with you guys this morning. I'm coming from upstate New York right now, which is kind of delightful. It's where I'm currently based. And yes, I haven't been doing giant consulting for, I think 2018 was when I went through consultant training. So 2016 was when I started coaching, and then 2018 was when I went through giant training. And yeah, so much of it for me is just the passion for helping people name what's underneath the surface. You can't change what you don't name, you can't change the things that you don't first admit to. And so that has been such a driving force for so much of my coaching business, but really even so much of my life. Just trying to help people understand what it's like to be, yes, on the other side of them, but to give verbiage and vocabulary for what's going on underneath the surface. So I will say that my default in conversation, and Eddie and John both know this too, is to go deep and scuba dive. And a lot of times I just need people to bring me up for air and snorkel. So that's the work that I've been in for a while. But anyway, so we're going to dive into the tool. Anything else you want to say, Slinker, before we dive in?
Oh, that's awesome. Bring it.
Okay. Do you want to share screen just so that we have the tool? Awesome. So we are talking about the boomerang effect this morning. And it really is, it's one of my favorite tools because to me, it's the art of understanding what great conversation looks like and what it means to actually be a great conversationalist, which I think in our day and age is a rarity for sure. But here's kind of how I want to start. I want you to imagine a time where you've been in conversation with someone who was just an extremely interesting human being, and they knew it. And maybe they'd hiked a number of high peaks, or maybe they were the owners of a retail shop that you love, or maybe it was it's an uncle that you see at Thanksgiving who thinks that, running the boxcar derby days was the highlight of his career. But think of then just a time where you've been in conversation with someone who typically would just really likes to share all of the interesting facts of their lives. And it feels like the felt goal on the other side of that conversation is to make sure you know just how interesting they are, right? To make sure that you know that you're fully informed and that you're fully enamored by their stories, their insights, the highlights of the last few days. It can be anything, but they want to make sure that you know about them. I recently had this happen with my family. My family was out to dinner and we ran into an acquaintance of mine that they had never met before. And we wound up having kind of a lengthier conversation. But in that conversation, we heard about his upbringing. We heard about his family. We heard about his family's family. We heard about their Hollywood connections. We heard about their time in politics. We heard about his career as an Instagram influencer. And it just went on and on and on. And to be fair, my family is really, really good at asking questions. That's kind of always been a shtick of our family, is that we do love to ask questions. But I'm pretty sure he left knowing very little about my family, and yet they sure did know a lot about him. So yes, we wanted to get to know him, right? That was part of the conversation, but I will just say that there was some influence lost with my family in that conversation with him. And so I know, the reality is I know this person's heart, and I know that it wasn't intentional, but there was an awareness to others in the conversation that wasn't there. And that was the thing that cost him influence. So what the boomerang effect illustrates for us is that most often if we aren't careful in conversation, we can really easily become a boomerang, where everything kind of gets tossed, anything that gets tossed out in conversation immediately comes back to us. We hear a story being told, or we hear somebody complaining about something, or we hear a situation that someone has gone through, and automatically we just relate it back to us, something that's happened to us. And the default for humanity is kind of to be interesting rather than actually being interested. The reality is most people, right, most humans like to talk about themselves. We know that. And if we aren't careful, if we're more accidental than we are intentional in our conversation, it's really easy for us to kind of fall into that trap. So from a self-awareness standpoint, if that tendency is left kind of undeveloped or unnoticed, it can absolutely undermine our effectiveness and our impact and our influence with other people. I would say the art overall of being a great conversationalist, and really the heart of this whole tool, is learning what it actually looks like to be interested in others. If we are the type of people, and this is what we are aiming to be, is the type of people who are other-centered, who are fighting for the highest good of others, who actually are walking into a room seeking to cultivate genuine connection with others and knowing others, then learning how to actually ask great questions and connect with who they are is key. And it's truly what I think a great image to think about is actually getting on the other side of the table into the other person's scenario and thinking about things from their point of view, asking questions really from their side of the table, from their story. And if we think about it, that's really what healthy leaders and healthy humans, intentional humans who are other-centric, are really seeking to do. One of the quotes that I love whenever I'm teaching this tool, and I don't remember if it's Brennan Manning, so I don't want you to quote me on this. Eddie will know, actually. If I say this and it's not a Brennan Manning quote, you'll know that it's not. But I think this is where I heard it. And he will say, you want to be the type of person that walks into a room and instead of saying, here I am, walks in with the mentality and the demeanor of, there you are. And that, to me, encompasses so much of what healthy and humble and other-centered conversationalists really are. And truly, when we interact with a type of person like that, like when you interact with another person like that, it feels like a game changer to me, right? It's almost like, it's like dessert. It's like sheer delight to just be in their company. You feel seen and you feel known and you feel heard. And a lot of times you're leaving edified and encouraged in some form or fashion. Oh. So it's a demeanor that's present, but also humble and secure and confident. And because I know you guys have been going through different tools this year, you've probably heard our self-preservation tool go by with the questions, what do you have to prove? What are you trying to prove? What are you trying to hide? Or maybe what do you feel like you're about to lose? And people that come in with that kind of secure confidence are the ones that are coming in with the answer being no to all of those questions. Nothing to prove, nothing to hide, nothing to lose. In that same vein, I'll tell one quick story that there was a plane ride I was on going from Denver to Santa Barbara. And that was a couple of years ago. And I remember it actually both because of the specific conversation I had and because the turbulence was awful, which, again, Eddie, you've been on the Vomit Comet recently, so I know that you know this. But the turbulence was incredible, but the conversation was also incredible. And I remember sitting next to this man and his wife who were truly some of the best conversationalists I'd ever met. And 20 minutes into the flight, they had asked me what I was reading, what I did for work, how I got into it, and all these really like thoughtful questions. And I was working at Lululemon at the time. We spent literally like probably an hour talking about how I'd gotten there, why I worked there, what they knew about it, how they lived in Japan for 20 years and how they'd been introduced to Lululemon, our love of handwritten notes, all these things that they were listening to me, and then they were connecting the dots for themselves and continuing to bring it back to me. It was just delightful. It was like super easy back and forth. And about an hour into the conversation, I find out he's the former CEO of Burton. He was the current CEO of Patagonia, and he was working on a project with Kevin Costner that, like, in that season, was working on a project with Kevin Costner in Santa Barbara. And I thought, how fantastic that I would likely have never known that this guy was not only a billionaire, but had some extremely powerful connections and notable connections. And he was genuinely interested in my job folding stretchy pants at Lululemon.
Yeah.
So we landed and they invited me to their house in Santa Barbara, and having a lot of connector blood, I decided like, absolutely I was going to go. And so I went, had coffee at their house, and now we've visited multiple times. But I realized after the flight, like that the reason that he probably rose to the leadership that he did was because he did embody so much of the intentionality of being both interesting and interested. So
yeah, that's
go for it, John.
Well, I'm just as I'm thinking about our time right now, I want to make sure that you tell us how you grew up, your family dynamics, and the opposite side of where we can fall short with this tool in conversation. And you're so right. If we think about the greatest leaders that we know, the most popular ones, the Billy Grahams, the JFKs, the Martin Luther King Jr.'s, who were great communicators. Most of us aren't going to be speaking from platforms like that, but we are going to have individual, smaller platforms that we can build influence in through just everyday conversation. And so I just would mimic your point there, but tell us about your family and how you grew up being more interested and what can happen, how we might be able to use that against ourselves, even just being interested and not sharing as much about ourselves.
It's the irony of this is that it can go both ways, right? I grew up in a family where good questions were our currency. And at our dinner table, we were basically taught how to ask good questions. I remember How to Win Friends and Influence People was like on our summer reading list when we were little. And so asking great questions was something that we learned because we knew people want to talk about themselves. Like that is something that my parents knew, so they wanted to pass that on to us. But when my sister started dating my now brother-in-law, he came to dinner at our house. And first dinner, of course, we like grilled him, right? We interview him, we ask him all the questions. But after like dinner 6 and 7 and 8, he didn't need to be grilled anymore. And if anything, he probably needed to learn some things about our family and our family dynamic. But he left dinner one night and he said to my sister, I always feel like I'm being interviewed at your house. Like, you guys don't ever just share your stuff. You don't ever just share stories. You're always asking questions. And it was totally a light bulb moment for me after having like learned this great skill of being interested, and yet recognizing that my default to being interested was actually probably making a lot of people feel like they were being interviewed on the other side of me. And so that sort of set a little trajectory forth for me in terms of figuring out, actually, I default to this, and now I default to this so hard that I use it as a guise for not sharing, not honestly, vulnerably sharing about myself and sharing stories. So yes, there's a need to recognize really the beautiful synergy and the willingness to be transparent, honest, vulnerable in conversation, to be able to share certain things about yourself, even when you're not asked. And that was the other thing for me, that I was like, well, people don't ask good questions. Like, I'm blaming it on them. versus grace and graciousness would say, okay, wait, how do I do this well? How do I actually engage fully and let them know I'm interested in them, and that I'm not using that as sort of a facade?
Yep.
I'm actually like seeking to do both.
That's so good. Thank you. Yeah, hiding behind the wall of just being interested is also not showing up secure, confident, humble. There might be something to hide there, or we're not feeling it that day or whatever. And so I think the gist of all of this here is, as a leader, we show up just with the heart that we see you, and we walk in the room saying, there you are. And that has to be our heart. And that requires a lot of intentionality and thought, especially right in the moment. This requires high emotional intelligence when the conversations are getting to a place where we're being uncomfortable, to still continue to be interested to the right degree that specific conversation or relationship requires. So good. So good. Thank you, Alexis. Eddie, you got anything for us?
Alexis, I just wanted to say, if anybody consistently embodies this being interested before interesting, but then also learning to create that balance and have moderation and then share, that's you. You actually model that for us. We were excited you picked that tool specifically to share with us. You practice that really well. I know multiple people on the call know you well enough to know that. So thank you. Appreciate you. Appreciate your time today.
You bet.
Eddie, why do we care so much to be interesting?
Bro, if you grew up in the States, or I mean, honestly, anywhere, you just wanted to be cool. We want to be cool. We thought being cool is how you make friends. And then you grow up, and then all of a sudden you realize letting people tell their story and share their, life with you, that actually builds influence. They remember how you made them feel when you were interested. And so it just flips it on its head, and it just changes everything. So,
yeah. Let others be cool before you get to be cool. That's a good word. Thanks, man.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Awesome. Alexis, thanks again.